When you mention purity, being afraid of our purity, it like brings me back. There's something in my subconscious and in my learning process during this life. It brings me back to the Genesis, the biblical Genesis of when Eve ate the apple and we lost our purity and we were expelled from the paradise. How can we be afraid? How come we're afraid of connecting with our purity?
It's contradictory because when we operate from the slave self, we know nothing but shadow as well as light. And so as soon as we touch purity, we touch darkness. But as the effect of the shadow self disappears, even when we feel scared, it won't be enough to stop us. And then that will actually delete and dismantle the fear completely. The story in Genesis, actually, it's long overdue for deletion itself because it's not accurate. And it's a very partial story about the beginnings of mankind. But the story of Genesis is the story of the genetic manipulation of human beings and the woman who changed the DNA of the human species so that it started to experience the slave self.
We're living a pause. What gave us the name to this program, Pause Between Worlds. We're living a pause, and I don't know. I'm not so sure if it's a pause that has been artificially created, or if it's a pause that is in our process of evolution. In this process of evolution, we came to have the gift of the pause so that we can realign ourselves in some way.
No pause.
Uh-huh.
There isn't a pause. This universe and our full reality continues unchecked and is never in any danger of being compromised or disappearing. But what happens is that the human being experiences itself in partiality and then starts to enter into a type of reality where we section off and then we have parallel dimensions. We have gaps between spaces. And in those gaps, we experience the freedom of ourselves because we're already coming from a non freedom. But actually, when, if you like, the veil drops on all of that, we experience not even the absence of pause, but there not really ever having been a possibility of its presence or its absence. It seems irrelevant as we move on. And a bit like a story, it just sloughs off, and we emerge as our new butterfly selves into the reality that actually we've always been in, and we were never without. It's one of those paradoxes of reality that is something that we can play with, but the full reality is always exactly the same, as long as we don't take that too literally with our minds.
The dissipation of that slave self. How do you visualize the world in terms of once we're freed from that slave self? How could we describe, visualize that state in terms of everyday life or our relation, that intimacy that we have with ourselves? How would that look like?
It's a beauty that's almost unimaginable for all of us right now, although we have glimpses of it increasingly and more amidst some of the so-called darkness around us. The future actually is not about time. The future is the living experience without filters, without censors on everything that is happening, including all the things that we don't like. And then we experience the most extraordinary range of abilities that the human being has. Pure love, the actual true identity of the human being, is able to cancel out and to heal all of the discrepancies, all of the issues, the patterns, all of the difficulties that we've been experiencing in ourselves and in others. And it's not something that we need to understand or know how to do. It simply flowers and it blossoms continually, influencing and shaping form around us and within us as we simply continue living as we are. And the impact materially on our civilizations will be huge. In the future, after the strife has died down and people have taken their power and they are experiencing themselves exactly as they are, we will come back into direct communion with all beings, the plants and the animals, the rocks. We will realize that this universe is inhabited by a great wealth of beings, and we will identify ourselves as those beings also, not apart from any one person or place anywhere. And we will be in full reception with the actual core, if you like, of humanity and of what it is to be human, which is nothing else than that amazing intimacy with all life, all possibilities, and existence. We're dreamers. And by that, I don't mean imagining something or visualize something or trying to create something. What happens is that the human being, from the very depths of ourselves, often in adversity as much as in happiness, we plug into a deep reservoir of our own being where we simply know how it should be, even though we don't have the form yet of that experience. And when we touch that note in ourselves, we generate a field around us, which then starts to entangle with the whole of reality and all beings and brings towards us the people and the things that we need to then build it. This is what dreaming actually is. And we are continually led by our deep wish and our aspiration and our passion to make something happen. And 9 times out of 10, we never know if we can do it or how we can do it, or if we do know how and that we will do it, we still encounter many things along the way which cause us to doubt it, but something else more solid in us just communicates somehow unexplainably that it is possible. That process will deepen and will speed up. And we will drop absolutely everything that stands in the way of us achieving what we want to until it actually happens materially. Because there will be such a pressure from the inside out, maybe even sometimes an uncomfortable pressure, to make the new world real. It's already there in our instructions, and all we have to do is birth it through our physicality. And just like a caterpillar doesn't ask how to become a butterfly, it just goes through the process. And maybe it wriggles a little bit to make it easier as its wings are starting to unfurl already. We will automatically and spontaneously begin to move in the direction that gives us freedom of flight and that support and that abundance and also financial wealth as well, which actually is, as we know, just a small aspect of it. In the future, we're not going to need the financial aspect quite so much, because there are very large parts of our financial system which are going to break away and not be possible to use anymore. And also, there are going to be large parts of our financial arrangements that we will not comply with anymore. And so it will boil down a lot more to the wish to exchange. And nobody will care so much about the currency of it as long as it feels easy and there is not any ripple or any negative feedback in the continuum. We will start to be entrained into literally the pathway where cooperation is primary and outcome is primary, and the mechanism of exchange will just fall into line with that. So it will actually really reverse in the way that we're thinking about it at the moment
Mhm.
and become its opposite. It will certainly be any type of money last and the wish to collaborate first. And it will almost certainly be the case that in the future people will be naming their price where financial arrangements occur, because people will need to cooperate and they will have everything that is needed to cooperate, except possibly the ability to pay for the service. And the ability to cooperate will override whether you have the actual finance for it or not, because otherwise nothing will happen. But when it's time, actually the purity of your own being just steps forward a little bit more closely, from within in the end. It reshapes all of your circuitry, your biology, your physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual layers. And then through that whole process, you are then able to receive more from the universe, and whoop, the information, it will seem to come sometimes from the outside in. A lot of the time it comes from the inside out as well. And it's like an interconnection. You're a nexus, if you like, of all of that universal intelligence inside and outside, which is almost informed by the purity of your own being. In truth, you're actually a generator or a transmitter of pure love, and everybody has exactly the same purpose if you want to think about it in terms of a purpose. And then it individuates into a different life pathway according to where you're born, what kind of character you have, etc., etc. You are your purpose.
Yeah.
It's not really about finding your purpose or knowing your purpose. If you don't know your purpose and you really, really want to, forget about it for the time being. If you need to know, you will. And actually, meanwhile, just know that you're already doing it, so it doesn't really matter. Accept and remind yourself that it's impossible to lose your connection. You never lose that connection, it's always there. And that if you're starting to worry about those things, and especially if you're starting to slip into thinking that you need a practice or to do something about your loss of connection, that all you need to do is just smile, because that will disappear soon, and your connection will remain exactly the same after and during and before that worry and that urge to do something about a loss of connection.
Hmm.
It's It's just a fleeting experience of a certain type of identity, which I call the slave self. The slave self is always panicking about losing connection, not having enough connection, not
Yeah.
doing. And it's a bit like a child that screams the house down over a very small thing, and the mother and the father comes in and just says, "Oh, that happened. Okay." And then you just wait, and then the next minute they're on to something else. The slave self is exactly the same. And actually, most of the time, the slave self doesn't need anything at all except for us to continue exactly the way that we are and not worry about the slave self at all. Because the power of who we are is already dismantling that And all of those fears and those worries about our future will gradually melt away as we realize that it's not what we thought it was. As we open up the true role of all beings, including the sun and heavenly bodies, will reveal themselves to us. They've always been doing those higher functions that we might think we're just beginning to discover. It's just that we're now grown up enough and we are now evolved enough to be able to receive that, if you like, higher level of knowledge. But it's always been there, we just haven't been on the same wavelength. It's been closed off from us because of our fixation on other things. And we are driving those changes. It's very important to remind you about that again. It's not the sun doing something to us that's new. Actually, we are holding on less to the things that get in the way of the sun showing its full nature to us and us being able to function fully on that level. We can see it in a different way. Everything that we have been doing is still incredibly valuable. It's just that we will start to open up to understanding it in a different way. When we do, for example, practices with the sun, we will just simply start to connect more with the direct experience of pure love of ourselves, instead of maybe the previous hookup and the previous framework where we were thinking that we were doing something to actually increase our level of spirituality, or that we were bringing about positive changes more quickly. We as human beings always experience ourselves as a reflection of something. We can't see ourselves unless we look in a mirror. And it just depends on the different mirrors that we choose. And that's the great joy of being a human being. We can choose whatever mirror we like. And as long as we don't forget that that reflection is never all of ourselves and just a part of ourselves, then we're free to play and to experience all of the wonderful feelings that we do, all the falsity and all of the truth as well of that experience. And it won't actually in any way change anything about the full nature of ourselves. It's, in a way, an incredible dance with the reality of our own being through lots of different filters. And now, in this moment, we're just changing those filters, and those filters are becoming less and less and less until we don't need any filters at all. And then that really will be something.
Thank you, Jacqueline. Thank you so much.